People who work in an exotic novelty shop. What's the weirdest thing a customer has done? Story 1. Not my story, but 2 from a girl I know who worked in those store. I will tell it from her perspective as it was told to me. So, there's the store part, but then, in the back, there's the private rooms for soloing off. There's a TV with a tape and DVD player, and you can rent those or magazines for like $0.25. Now, after people leave, it's our job if you're working at a counter to clean up unless it's really bad, and then we get the manager. So this kid comes in, looks young, about 18, we check ID and record it. He goes back with some magazines, and when he's done, he just books it out of there. I've already got a bad feeling, and I go back and the room he was in is just covered in smoothie, like covered in it. All over the floor, the walls, the television screen, even the pages of the magazine are all stuck together. I have never seen so much of it in my life. I don't even know how he made that much. And I am like, hell no, I'm not cleaning this up. So I go and get the manager, but he's busy. So I go to the front and check the list where we have people check in. We have them write down their phone number as well, so I go to ring this kid up, figuring he's probably given me a wrong number, but it's worth a shot. So I dial the number, and I'm like, hey, is this John Smith? And the voice, yes, it is. What is it? Now it sounds enough like the kid, so I figure it's him. But what I didn't realize is that it wasn't the kid who had just come in, but his dad. So not realizing this, I tell him, hey, this is Amy, down at the video store. You left a real mess in our room, and I'd really appreciate it if you'd come down here and clean it up. So about 20 minutes later, this guy comes in the door because his dad is hauling him in by the ear, screaming at him the entire time. I can't believe you going to a place like this, and this or is calling me, telling me you've made a mess everywhere. And of course I'm like, hell no, because I'm no S-worker. I don't support the weird crap you people do. I just work here. So I tell him that, but the dad keeps screaming and the kid is just crying and telling his dad it's because his girlfriend dumped him and he's so lonely, and he ends up becoming so embarrassed and upset he literally pees his pants in front of the entire store. And I still ended up having to clean up his frigging smoothie. Another time, a guy came in, seemed kinda weird, grabbed a stack of magazines and put them on the counter and asked, can I have these for free? And I was like, no, dude, you gotta pay for those. So, he leaves them on the counter, walks out, then comes back in 20 minutes, except now his pants and inners are gone, so he's just wearing a shirt and nothing else. And he picks up magazines and is like, now can I have these for free? And I'm like, no, get the hell out of my store. Then I get my manager to come look at the videotapes, cause I'm like, this crap is crazy. So we're watching the tapes, and I point the guy out and my manager goes pale. Turns out it's the manager's dad. He had to go call his mom and let her know. It was an awkward day. Before we continue, do us a quick favor, smash that like button, and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. I worked at a shop for 2 years. And just left in December. Here's one of my favorite stories. This African guy comes in and I tell him, let me know if you have any questions. About a minute later, he calls me over to the realistic toys. Is this one regular? He asks, holding one up. I blink. What do you mean by regular, Sep? He frowns slightly. Does it vibrate? Yes, I say, nodding. He shakes his head. That's not what I want. I lead him over to the toys that don't vibrate. These are the non-vibrating ones, I explain. So this one is regular? He asks again, picking one up. Yeah, I confirm. He turns the box over in his hands. How it is in box? Why so heavy? He asks, genuinely puzzled. Jesus Christ, I think to myself. That's just the brand's packaging, I say out loud. It also comes with some extra stuff. I open the box slightly to show him what's inside. He points to another toy on the shelf. So this one too? He asks. No, I reply. That's another brand. Different packaging. I walked away thinking that's the end of it. Less than 5 minutes later, he calls me over again, this time to the DVD section. He picks up a transgender film and points to the person on the cover. Where can I find these people in Columbus? He asks. I stared at him, not sure I heard correctly. What do you mean? I ask. These people, he says, tapping the cover. Where do they go? Where can I find them? I was taken aback. They're all over, I say hesitantly. Where? He presses. You can always tell if someone is trans, I say. They look like you and me. He squints at me. Where can I go in Columbus to find them? I don't know, I reply, my patience thinning. Maybe look it up online? What website? He asks, completely serious. I don't know. I say flatly. You have to figure that out yourself. So, there's no phone number in Columbus? He asks, as if that's a normal thing. I was like, oh my God, go away. Story 3. I worked in a shop for a couple of years part-time as my brother was the manager. We used to get an old man come in, who was I think 65 plus, who wouldn't buy anything but would come up to the counter and attempt to flirt with my elder straight married brother. My bro doesn't have that much confidence, so never kicked him out. But one day when he came in, after doing so a number of times before, I lost it and kicked him out. He tried it on me once before by trying to take my hand to tell me I had a nice ring, but could tell I wasn't having any of it. He was just a weird, creepy guy who seemed to take advantage of vulnerable men. We also had a regular old man that would come in who loved trannies even though he was married for most of his life and had recently lost his wife. Then you had the random, seemingly normal guy who would come in and buy the biggest dong we had, that came with a dog tag like some sort of trophy for having taken it on. It was an interesting period of my life that I would never want to repeat though. Story 4. I'm not sure if it qualifies just as weird, but I have 2 stories of when I briefly worked in a store. My coworker had just gone to drop off the bank deposit when a man came in. We're trained to engage with every customer and stay nearby in whatever area they're in, to be right there if they need it, but mainly to watch for theft. This man immediately started eyeing me up and down, telling me stories about exposing himself at a local pub, then quickly adding, I don't mean I'm going to do that now or anything. He kept talking about his dong, and even said that if I just looked at it, it would get up. At that point, I was still new to the job and didn't know if I could kick him out because I felt threatened or if I just had to tolerate it. Eventually he left, but he parked right in front of the store and sat there for a good 15 to 20 minutes. I'm pretty sure he was soloing off. Another story is about an old man, almost crippled by diabetes. He took a liking to me almost immediately because I was friendly, and he asked me to pick out lingerie for him that I thought he would like. He did this about 4 or 5 times in one day, and every time he came back I could tell he was wearing the lingerie I'd picked out because you could see it through his shirt. I felt sorry for him, so I was always nice and helpful. But coworkers told me he was a complete a-hole to everyone else but me. After that, he started coming in almost every time I worked, buying more undies because he recognized my car. Often he'd show up before my coworker arrived, or if it was later, he'd specifically ask for me. Eventually, my boss told him to start going to a different store in the chain because he was towing the line of stalking. I didn't care that he enjoyed wearing women's undies, but treating my coworkers badly and basically stalking me, that was not okay. Of course, there were constant phone calls from people trying to get you to say certain things while they were soloing, or others asking you to watch them use their new pocket kitty in the parking lot. I had a lot of friendly regulars who came in to buy corn and chat about their week. I loved helping couples find items to spice things up, and I enjoyed educating people about their back door and the proper products for it. Most customers were cool or kept their heads down. Sadly, it's those few who made me feel threatened that ruined the experience. Eventually, I had to find a new job. These 2 stories are the first that come to mind, but I do have a couple more. Story 5. I do not and have not worked in a shop, but I was in one when something hilarious happened. My girlfriend and I went into a shop and were looking at vibrating playthings. This big guy, tall and fat, walks in and heads over to the dongs area. He grabs a horse dong one and immediately turns around, drops his clothing, and without the slightest bit of awkwardness, uses it right then and there. Almost immediately after, the security guard necessary in the inner city comes over, grabs the guy, and drags him outside, throwing him to the ground, where he landed right on the dong, making it go even further up. He walks back in and apologizes to us, saying the guy was a known serial pest who regularly pulled stunts like this at shops. Turns out, the guard had been on a toilet break when the guy came in and only found out when the cashier told him. 2 months later, we went into the same shop and this guy was out front banging on the door with the same horse dong. We decided to turn around and go back later. Story 6. I worked at a shop, we were told to call it a romantic boutique, for just over a year. Every few weeks, this guy would come in. He looked like your typical 30-something hick, camo outfit, work boots, long beard, big truck. He always asked to try on the tight, sexy club dresses we sold. That part wasn't the issue. Plenty of men have private desires to dress up. The problem was that he'd always ask one of the staff, all women under 30, for their opinion while he modeled the dresses. And every time, he'd be visibly up and excited. What finally got him banned for good was when he returned 3 dresses with very obvious stains. The next time he came in, we had to explain why he was no longer allowed. I couldn't tell if he was more pissed off or embarrassed. And that's just the first story that came to mind. I have so many more that are only now coming back to me. Story 7. I was the only employee in the store because they had just moved me up to be a key holder, or a person who has keys to the cash drawer. And in the middle of the day, this dude came into the shop. I greeted him and told him about a few specials as usual, and then things just got weird. One red flag I noticed was that he didn't really know what section to look in. Most dudes his age either go straight to the toys or DVDs, but he was just walking around the lingerie and seeming lost. Wondering if he was nervous to be in the shop, I walked up and asked if he was looking for anything in specific. He said no, and that he doesn't know much English. He was a Hispanic dude, so I said, "Okay, I'm here to help if you need me." Then he started looking at the cameras, picking up random things, and I started to get worried, and wandering around for nearly 10 minutes at this point. Things didn't feel right. Then out of nowhere, the man reached into his pocket and started to approach me at a faster pace. At the same exact time my boyfriend walked in. I had texted my boyfriend about 35 minutes before to drop me off some Taco Bell for lunch, and he just so happened to get there at that moment. The man froze after seeing him, and then sprinted out of the store. Basically, Taco Bell saved my life. Story 8. I've got a long list. A longtime regular once admitted that he used to sneak up on sheep back in Puerto Rico when he was a young lad. The hard part was keeping a neutral reaction. I couldn't very well alienate a guy who'd been coming here for over 10 years just because of a disturbing childhood story, could I? Then there was this really old guy with a creepy laugh who looked every bit like a PDF file and basically admitted he was one. That was disconcerting. He still comes around, and all I can do is be cordial. I should mention I have no proof, though sometimes I think about dropping an anonymous tip to someone. Another time, a tweaker ran out of the store with his arms full of toys and outfits. It wasn't funny in itself, but it looked hilarious because he was struggling to carry it all. I wasn't even mad. His face is on the wall now. I learned what a sounding rod was when a reasonably good-looking, normal-seeming customer asked if we carried one. I had to ask him what the hell that was and realized I wasn't ready to hear what it really was. Not too long ago, a little guy came in to buy the hand, which is a life-size 16-inch thing. About an hour later, he returned saying he'd been overambitious and instead bought a 17-inch dong that'd make a horse jealous. Tenacious dude. Then, a somewhat normal-looking girl, not homeless or anything, bolted through the door, head down low, avoiding eye contact, and locked herself in the employee restroom. I admit it shouldn't have been unlocked. I politely told her through the door that it was for employees, but I'd normally be happy to let her use it if she asked. She seemed fine with that and apologized. A couple minutes later, she emerged and bolted for the door like she'd come in. I guess I scoffed, because obviously she had no intention of being a customer. She spun around and started mouthing off at me about how rude I was and how dare I, blah blah blah. So, I started yelling over her because she wasn't giving me a chance to speak. Classic bluster move when someone knows they're wrong. I told her to leave, that she never intended to be a customer, that she was banned, and never to come back. I didn't stop until she left, gave her a taste of her own medicine. Interestingly, while this was happening, I was reading a Reddit thread about a pizza shop owner who used illegal force to keep a woman from entering just to use the restroom, and I was commenting that he went too far. Oof. A really homeless-looking guy came in, clearly out of his mind, and interrupted my transaction with a rather quiet regular to ask if we sold corn. Taken aback but holding a corno in hand, I told him yes we did. He then rudely asked if we had a license to sell that corn. I didn't like his tone, but told him we were fully legal and compliant. He asked if he could see the license, again sneering like he wasn't acting in good faith. That made me ask, "Who the hell are you?" He said he was an officer. Playing along, I asked if he was undercover, not catching my mocking tone and feeling bold. He said, "Why, yes I am," like the idea hadn't occurred to him. I laughed, told him he was full of it, and to get out of my shop. He refused. So, I grabbed the phone and told him I was calling the real police. He was still incredulous, so I made a show of pressing each key on the phone. The operator answered, and I began explaining what was going on. That's when he started sidling toward the door, but in a way that was still confrontational, like he wasn't about to back down with his tail between his legs. Right as I was telling the 911 operator that he was impersonating an officer, he bolted for the door. Must have realized how very illegal that was. I thanked 911, let them know he had left, and said no officer was necessary. I kept an eye on the douche canoe through the window for a few minutes. He went across the street and behind some buildings for a while, then emerged and started walking away. As he did, he turned to look back over his shoulder at the store. He saw me standing there in the window, giving him the stink eye and looking menacing. He turned back quickly and picked up the pace. He came back a few days later, poked his head in the door, almost said something, but then saw me staring at him. So he turned around and left. That was the last I saw of him. Another time, a mother came in with her young daughter. I had to explain what kind of store this was and that her child wasn't allowed. She said she just needed to use the bathroom real quick. And since I'm understanding, I made an allowance on the condition she cover her daughter's eyes on the way. They went in and stayed for about 20 minutes. I heard the toilet flush several times and started to worry. A customer distracted me long enough for them to quietly leave without a word. When I checked, the toilet was backed up, water was on the floor, and it was all red. Then I noticed used tampons, plural, floating in the bowl. Some people, Story 9. It wasn't just one thing, but there was this one guy who used to come in to rent videos for our on-site booths. For $7, you could watch any tape in the store once, no rewinding. He always asked for the same 2 videos. Every single time. I still remember them, even 15 years later, a compilation of jackhammer position scenes and some barely legal 18 and over video. I grew to loathe this man. He'd get upset when we didn't keep his videos behind the counter for him. Honestly, he watched them so often he could vote them 4 times over. The cherry on top? One day, he straight up peed on the floor and claimed he spilled his Mountain Dew. There were gaps at the bottom of the booth doors, big enough to see feet. I could clearly see the stream, 6 inches in front of his shoes, and hear it from 10 feet away. And he had the nerve to be mad when I didn't let him take his drink in there the next time. Story 10. I only worked at one for a few months, but I remember one guy was walking around looking at the Korn DVDs and started soloing off. I looked up because I heard weird noises, and as I did, he stopped, but his hand stayed in, motionless, kinda trying to hide it. I looked down at the inventory paperwork I was doing, and he started right up again. We had monitor down below the counter that I could see out of the corner of my eye, and sure enough, he was doing it again. I looked up at him, cleared my throat kinda loud, and before I could even say anything, the guy up and ran out the door. Story 11. A male customer walked into the store looking a bit rough around the edges. He told me at the counter that he'd just gotten out of jail and was feeling pretty charged. He wandered around the store grabbing his dong and getting a bit touchy with things, as you might expect. I kept doing my work at the counter and didn't watch him too closely on the cameras because he seemed harmless. After a few minutes, I glanced at the monitor showing the DVD section and saw him pick up a plastic door stop, the ribbed, round, white things that stop doors from banging into walls, and shove it in his back door, and kept browsing. It must have been uncomfortable because he soon pulled it out and plopped it onto the floor. As a professional retail assistant, I waited for him to leave that area, then discreetly picked up the used doorstop with 2 pairs of gloves on one hand and a huge wad of paper towels and tossed it in the bin. It was covered in thick, well, you can imagine. I let him continue browsing until he left because I didn't want to confront a guy fresh out of jail. Story 12. Gosh. I think the worst I've ever had was this dude who tried to hit on me by implying his dong was big, but he was shopping for ways to make it bigger. He'd be like, my girlfriend isn't happy with my dong. She says it's only 9 and she wants 10. How can I fix that? And then he finally asked if I wanted to have some fun with him, and I said no. Then he proceeded to touch my arm, and I said, don't frigging touch me. You can get the F out of my store.
Right.
And as he was leaving, he turned back and was like, so my girlfriend wants me to last longer. If I'm lasting 3 hours, will the dong rings help? Bruh was still trying. Story 13. I guess it depends on what you'd consider weird. When I used to work at one, it was back in the early 2000s when VHS was still a thing and DVD was the new tech, just to give you an idea. Most of the customers were shy and nervous to be there, so they didn't make much trouble. Some just wanted to go solo off in the video booths and go home. I worked overnights, so I had to shoo the gay sex workers out of the video booth aisles, but they were pretty cool about it. I had this woman who called frequently for phone banging. If I was bored, I'd indulge her, but sometimes I'd say, I have customers, gotta go. Never, to my knowledge, met her in person. The funniest thing to me were the local print swinger magazines. The internet wasn't as big a thing yet, so there were tons of such magazines. City, state, county, regional, etc. And each one came in on a different day of the month, and you would inevitably get swinger couples coming in all excited. I cannot tell you how many couples were so proud to show me their brand new ad they were finally seeing in print, shoving the grainy black and white newspaper print photos on my face going, look, that's our ad, that's my dong, and my wife's honeypot. Sadly, most of them were not the kind of people you wanted to see bare at all. About the wildest thing that happened was this couple that came in. Wife was super friggin' hot and was flirting for a discount. We had an old punch register, not computerized, so I could make up prices if I really wanted to. We end up working out a deal where I got to eat her pie while her husband watched, in exchange for a 50% discount on $150 fake dong. We all came away happy. Story 14? These are probably way more mild than some of the best ones in the thread already, but I do have a few memorable stories. It may be worth mentioning that the shop is historically more of a gay store, and that I'm a guy. There was the guy who tried to hook me up with his cousin in Jamaica. We're in Canada. He was FaceTiming him and showing him our wall of fake dongs when he saw me and started asking where the plugs were, how big I can personally take it, and whether I'd like to fly to Jamaica to have fun with his cousin whose dong was far bigger than my indicated preference. Also, I think the cousin was soloing to me over FaceTime. They also didn't realize I was an employee until midway through the conversation. This was at the beginning of my very first shift, before the person training me got to the store, and it was literally my first interaction with a customer there, and in retail in general, so it set a bit of a precedent. There was the guy who casually said, out of the blue and with no contextual relevance, you know what I'd really like, to pour my smoothie on your face. Ha ha ha. And just laughing like it was the funniest joke in the world, and then apologizing immediately for the inappropriate comment. During Pride weekend, one guy by the underwear section was glancing left and right somewhat nervously and feeling into his pants. It looked like he was stealing something. So I approached him and asked if I could help him with anything. Turns out he wanted someone to reach into his buns and read out what size his underwear was. I did it, because I didn't think I'd mind, and I didn't want to send him to our only fitting room with a huge crowd in the store, Pride being the busiest time of year for us. He was clammy and sweaty. I don't think I've ever felt regret as immediate as that. Story 15. I've never worked in a shop, but I worked in a disability shop for elderly people for 6 years. We sold mobility scooters, reclining chairs, and things like that. We also carried a lot of adult incontinence products. Every so often, a guy would call sounding out of breath and ask what brands of incontinence products we sold. Once we told him, he'd try to engage us in whatever he was doing. He'd say things like, I'm wearing one of your nappies, and my mummy has put it on really tight so I won't put my hands in there. Can you help me? Most of the time I'd just hang up once I realized it was him. Occasionally I'd play along until he hung up, saying things like, your mummy is in the shop now. Shall I put her on? He didn't like it when we played along. He was very well spoken, and we never figured out if he was actually one of our customers. We were in regular contact with other disability shops nearby, all run by different members of the same family, and they got calls from him too. At first, his calls seemed random, usually early in the morning around 9 o'clock. But eventually, we realized he only called during school holidays. Story 16. Finally, one I actually have a story. Or 3, 4. I worked for a super sketchy smoke shop for over a year. The kind of shop that was selling spice under the counter after each ban at the owner's discretion. Anyways, we had an entire wall of fake dongs, just floor to ceiling, fake dongs, and all sorts of other goodies. Well, when we sold one, there was obviously no returns for sanitary reasons, which meant I got the strange task of putting some batteries in fake dongs, so the customer knew what they were in for before their purchase. This practice attracted some real frigging weirdos, as you might imagine, one in particular being a group of intoxicated middle-aged ladies who went through the aforementioned process and then stepped out into the parking lot, hopped into their car that was right in front of our camera, and pounded away with that thing with their feet up on the dash. There's so much that happened to me while working there that it feels like a fever dream to reminisce. Once, I saw a guy get bitten by a wolf dog. We accidentally triggered the silent alarm. I cleaned out a bathroom the owner had lived in and barricaded shut, filled with meth pipes and company t-shirts he'd been using as toilet paper, and we dealt with meth heads and death threats on a weekly basis. I give it a solid 7 out of 10. Story 17. I wasn't working in a shop, but this happened in one. Back in the early 2000s, I was really into goth culture and was looking for a spiked necklace, like a dog collar. I live in Panama City, Panama, where even now things like that are seen as filthy or anti-God or some other narrow-minded nonsense. So, a friend and I walked into a shop and asked the clerk behind the counter if they carried those. He politely looked up from his newspaper and said no, but then proceeded to try to cross-sell me some of the many dongs they had on the wall. I was about to politely decline when he started laughing. Then another guy popped out from behind the DVD shelves, laughing too. Then a third guy came out of the back room, laughing as well. It felt really weird. And suddenly I had flashbacks to the Marcellus Wallace scene in Pulp Fiction. I just whined and left. I was about 20 at the time. Definitely the creepiest experience I've had in a shop. Story 18. A customer insisted I process a return on a non-intimate toy item immediately, even though it wasn't required for the refund. I begrudgingly complied, and as soon as I did, he bolted. My ganglia lit up, something felt off. I scanned the floor, the counter, everything looked fine. But the feeling didn't go away. I flipped the item over to inspect it, and sure enough, my fingers landed in a well-placed smear of human feces. As a bonus, I'd been covering shifts for 24 hours straight, including a double just 6 hours before that stretch. I liked a lot about the job. But from day one, I noticed no one had replaced the soap we were out of. Turns out, the boss whose shifts I was covering had lied about their kid being in the hospital. They were out drinking with friends. In case anyone's wondering, I coped by locking up, boiling my hands at a place down the street, smoking a joint, and re-evaluating my life. I texted my boss that I quit and explained why, but I didn't say which item in the return pile had been the shat-on one. I like to think they had to sniff it out. Story 19. I had a customer call asking if we had anything like pacifiers, diapers. Not my cup of tea. But hey, we don't judge. It got weird when he started telling me he had baby blue eyes, blonde curly hair, and a yellow diaper, and I had a very motherly voice and asked if I would change his diaper. I politely declined. He then proceeded to ask what color inners I was wearing, and when I declined to answer him, he offered to buy them. While the little devil on my shoulder wondered how much I could get for them, I declined the offer again and told him I had to go. He said he had one more question. If he came in, could I please change his diaper? He was so sincere and serious the whole time, and I managed to hold my laughter till I hung up. It was one of the few moments that I was actually rolling on the floor, holding my side, crying in laughter. I almost needed my diaper changed. Don't really wear diapers, of course. Story 20. Oh boy. I've been waiting for this. I have a ton of stories, but this is by far one of the most bizarre. A bit of background. So, the shop I work in has a video arcade, which is just a long hallway full of booths for watching corn. We have security cameras in the hallway, not in the booths, so we can see if anything fishy is going down. Cut to me working graveyard, trying hard to make sales goal. It was a pretty dead night with just a few dudes in the arcade. I was chilling at the counter just being bored when a customer walked in, and he was immediately weird, but most people coming into the shop at 3 a.m. usually are weird. He looked normal enough, young guy, not bad looking. However, he was twitchy, possibly on something, and making really awkward flirtatious jabs at me. It's nothing I haven't dealt with before, and usually when someone is acting weird, I find some way to get them out of the shop, but I'm just desperate for that sales commission at this point. And this guy is putting stuff on the counter that would add up to like a $200 sale. So, I bit my tongue and ring him up with just the bare minimum pleasantries. As he was checking out, he asked to add an arcade ticket to his purchase. I rang him up for that as well and offered to hold his purchase up at the counter for him. He heads back there as I'm finishing bagging his stuff and putting back the items that he decided he didn't need. It's not long before I started to hear some kind of rustling and commotion in the back, so I decided to check the cameras. This dude was straight up running up and down the hallways with his shirt off and tied around his neck. I watched him keep going for a bit before I decided to head back there. The cameras really didn't do him justice. Seeing this man cringe under the beam of my flashlight in the dark arcade hallway was a sight to behold. He apparently had been sliding around the floor on his bare belly, and he had all kinds of crap just clinging to his chest and stomach that he picked up from the floor. He also held one of the merchandising hooks we stored in the back in his hand, looking like he was ready to fight someone. All I could manage to say was, "What the hell are you doing?" And his response in the most bizarrely casual tone was, "Some guy asked me to show him my dong, and I'm not cool with that." I calmly told him to put the hook down, put his frigging shirt back on, and get out. And the strangest thing is that he did. Right away, he left so normally, picked up his purchase, and even hit me with a cheery "have a nice night" on the way out. Now the best part is something I apparently missed at the time. One of the guys who was also in the arcade at the time came up to me to tell me later how truly weird that guy was. He was indeed sliding around on the bare floor on his belly, but also while yelling to everyone in the arcade, "I'm a walrus! I'm a walrus! Come and get me! I'm a walrus! Anybody got a wet floor because I need one?" Luckily, I've never seen that guy in the shop again. I've got a million other weird things that have happened to me there, but the walrus story is one of my favorites. Story 21. It's not too exciting, but we found an empty box that someone had clearly stolen the merchandise from. It was a pocket kitty. Like, okay, you don't want to pay, you're embarrassed, whatever. What confused me though was that the one he stole was like $10 and there were more expensive and better ones right next to the $10 one. Also, we had a lot of people coming in for poppers, which is the slang term for amyl nitrate. I don't remember what the right term was for them, but we very much didn't have them and had to pretend like we didn't know what they were to get the people asking for them to leave. Look at all of the other merchandise. And a lot of tourist Indian men came in looking for stuff to help them last longer in bed and for better stiffies. Most of these people were hella rich and would just buy a little of everything in the store. Edit. The foreign tourists were always very interested in the dong extenders, like they definitely had a small dong, and were trying everything to help them in bed. I felt sorry for the people they were going to try to bang. Edit 2. Forgot to add that we got prank calls all the time asking if we had plugs or dongs. Yes, we have both, and no, you're not funny or shocking us by calling our store and asking those questions. Story 22. Obligatory. I didn't work there, but anyway, my husband and I like to go to these shops occasionally to browse and pretend we'll actually follow through on our freaky promises. I have a couple of good stories. Once we had some time to kill after dinner in Moon, Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh area suburb, and we went into this hole-in-the-wall shop. The cashier was a little woman about 60 years old and was having a conversation about syphilis with another patron. She was telling the guy, "Oh, in the 70s it was like getting strep throat. You took antibiotics and 3 days later you went right back to banging." The next story, we were in Columbus. Oh, and this old lesbian woman saw us chuckling about this gigantic black dong. She followed me until my husband and I were in separate parts of the store and proceeded to tell me she'd buy it for me if I let her bang me with it first. The final story, we were in another toy store in Columbus that sold more freaky type items, and I was playfully whacking my husband with a crop. This old guy walks up, who for some reason I thought was the owner of the shop, and was encouraging us to try out the toys and says, "Do that to him again, but harder this time." so I cracked my husband fairly hard and giggled. The guy said nothing but had a visible stiffy. Story 23. I worked graveyards in a corn book store when I was a young man. It was actually a very nice place. I have 2 stories to share. First story. One evening, this older professional couple, maybe in their early 60s or late 50s, came into the store. We had other guests in the place, so I noted their arrival and carried on with my work. The employee island was elevated 10 feet or so above the floor level, which greatly aided with visibility of the store and the guests. After a bit, the older couple were the only ones in the store, but they seemed to be acting in a responsible manner, so I continued with my tasks with only giving an occasional glance at them. After a few minutes, I looked back up and observed them to be much closer than before. The lady, who I discovered was in remarkable shape for her age, had leaned over a rack and had her dress flipped up, and they were both looking back at me. I started to speak, and the gentleman made an offering hand gesture to me like one would make towards a plate of hors d'oeuvres at a loud party. She was looking over her shoulder at me, and when he did this, she smiled warmly and nodded. I immediately fell back into my super polite country upbringing and said something like, "That is a very nice offer, and I truly regret that I cannot accept. Unfortunately, to boot everything here is video recorded, and we aren't that kind of store. Please wrap up any purchases you wish to make so I can ring you out, but after that I must ask you to move along." In my head, I was totally panicking. I had never just been offered something like that before. I can only image the conversation. "He's cute. You want to offer him some? That sounds lovely. Dear, I don't see how he could refuse." God. They paid for their items. Not even slightly awkward about things, but nor were they overbearing. Then they went about their way. Hell of a thing. I was in my early 20s, and learned right then and there that ladies in their 60s can maintain an awesome bod. Also, Jesus Christ, that was awkward and scary. Who knows what they might have had in mind? Innocent fun, blackmail, some weird disease fantasy? Second story. Another night, at the same shop. The shop was empty, except for me. This is a good time as I can get out onto the floor and restock, vacuum up carpets, etc. I always stayed within sight of the security monitors though. As I was putting away some inventory, I heard the ding from the motion detectors in the parking lot. Someone had arrived. Looking at the video, I can see an older Peterbilt truck in the lot. Then this guy steps out. The scale is all wrong. I realize it was one of those F-350 conversions. So, waiting for the customer, I start doing work behind the counter. Remember, the counter is 10 feet off the floor, and I am 5'10". I hear the door chime go off, and look over to greet the customer. I see a guy leaning over and hugging himself come through the door. He had to do this, otherwise he wouldn't fit. The truck in the lot, full size. This man is a giant, literally, at 6'8". With the floor, I am still looking up at this man. He is easily 4 feet at the shoulders. Picture the biggest, hairiest, gigantic biker dude driving a Peterbilt you can imagine. Then put him in boots that give him another 2 feet of height. A living monster. "So, I'm here on my own?" Poker face. He sees our coffee pot and very politely asks if we might make some for him. I said sure and started a pot. The guy starts moving clockwise around the store. It's a pretty big place. So I get back to work at the counter and start to adapt to the new normal of an honest-to-God Bigfoot in my shop. He's there for an hour or so, which isn't unusual for truckers. Most of them were always very polite and just looking for a rest. Our shop was pretty quiet, which seemed to be very nice for them. Plus, I make some badass coffee. As I said, about an hour or so goes by, and this guy comes up to the counter to check out. I am still looking up at this dude. He then sets down a 4-foot-tall pile of corn DVDs. I am straight, and never had an issue with homosexuality or homosexuals, which is an advantage in here. However, I don't frighten easily, but I was well within arm's reach of someone who is the living definition of why I need a 30-round magazine in my .45. There is no way I could defend myself if he chose to get stupid. We make some small talk about the weather, road conditions, and the like, while I ring up all this dude corn. He was very polite the entire time, quite friendly. We settle up the bill and I bag up his purchases for him. After he steps through, sort of over, the anti-theft system, I hand him his bags, and he starts to duck to go out the door. Then he pauses and comes back inside. He says, "May I ask you a question? An honest question?" I say, "Of course, sir. What's up?" He nods at his bags. "Would you ever have guessed? Just from my appearance?" I reply, "No, sir, but to be fair, I don't usually concern myself with that. If it's important to them, I find people will let you know." With that, he nodded, thanked me for my candor, and departed. I later realized that was a hell of a learning experience for me. I am never intimidated by people. Maybe I am miswired in some way, but I stopped being scared of scary people in high school. I have no doubts that I can fight and win in most cases. I have had to before, but I learned perspective. That man could have twisted me apart like a piece of licorice if he wanted to, and I couldn't have done anything to stop him short of my gun. Even then, it's iffy. But his concern was that people could look at him and discover his secret just by seeing him. This man, who could destroy 10 men at once, was worried people might know he was gay. I thank him for that to this day, although I have no idea who he is. I also learned what it must feel like for women around me. I'm only 5'10", but I am a really big, strong guy. When I was married, the tailor measuring me for my tux called me a freak to my face. I had never experienced what it must be like for other people who are so tiny and fragile compared to me, until I shook hands with Bigfoot in a corn bookstore over a 4-foot-tall stack of gay corn. Oh, 4 feet. That's how wide our shelves were. He bought the whole shelf and carried it between his hands to the checkout counter. Story 24. So, I worked at an Ann Summers, so it's a sort of corno shop but lit version. But we did sell toys, so I have a few stories. The first is the least impressive. Basically a wank stain who I'd worked with at a job before. He would come in every once in a while and try to embarrass me. But he would try and embarrass me by asking me for advice about underwear and stuff for his girlfriend. Like, dude, I literally sell plugs and you think I'm gonna get flustered by a bra? Sure. We also had this guy who would come in every couple of weeks. Tall, skinny guy, probably in his 50s. Super nervous, shaking, stuttering, everything. He would take one of us aside and ask us if we had any strappies. Now, Ann Summers does sell them, but we were a small store so we never actually stocked them. So every time we would say that and point out that we could order one there and then for him to either be delivered to his house or to the shop if he didn't want it showing up at his front door. Every time he would say no. He was nice enough, harmless. And this is the one that sticks out to me though, and was actually one of the first times I considered sex ed as something I want to do. A woman came into the shop and told me that her husband likes a little finger in his cakes. Okay, sure, lots of guys do. But she had just been to the doctor, and she had an infection on her finger so couldn't at the moment. Which is fine, we have little mini plugs that are about the said size. She was happy with one of those. So, I also suggest getting some cleaning wipes if she hasn't already got them. Why would I need to clean it? And I suddenly realized why she had an infected finger. Story 25. In college, there was a well-known human sexuality course that got so popular, it was offered every term in a 300-person lecture hall. One of the assignments was to take a trip to the local shop and look around, comment on a few things, broaden your horizons essentially. I went with a friend of mine, and we were mostly treating it like a joke. We were the only 2 people in there besides the woman working the counter. We started talking to her and she started taking out all kinds of things. One was a very realistic female torso. She encouraged us to feel and experiment. She was cool about it all. She'd probably had 100 horny college students in the shop that week. Anyway, before we left, my friend ended up filling out a job application. He didn't get a job, but he did get extra credit from the professor. So I didn't work there, but I might be someone's weird story. Story 26. I worked at a store that sold novelty items. We had a large selection of toys and lingerie along with other merchandise. One day, a middle-aged woman came in holding a plush rabbit wrapped in a baby blanket. She was wearing a brand new Adidas tracksuit with a torn-up robe over it. She came to the counter and told us her husband owned the store, which was impossible since we were part of a corporation and no single person could claim ownership. Then she wandered to the back and picked out the largest toy we had, wrapped it up like a baby, and started heading for the exit. My manager noticed and went to intercept her. We had frequent thefts, and usually, if we could just recover the merchandise, we'd let it go. She stopped the woman and asked for the item back. That's when the woman began screaming that her husband said it was okay and that she needed the toy to get her baby back. She claimed her husband and his new mistress had stolen her eggs and created a child, and that, unless she had that toy, they wouldn't return the baby. We had no choice but to call the police. When they arrived and arrested her, they also took the rabbit, which set her off. She began crying and screaming that they were taking her baby and that she'd get revenge on all of us because we knew what she was trying to do and because we supported the legalization of marijuana. We sold a lot of items with pot leaves on them. It was a whole ordeal. Story 27. I never worked at a store myself, but I had a friend who did, and the stories she'd tell were wild. We used to laugh about the return attempts. Guys asking for refunds on the video booths because they paid for more time than they needed. Then there were the mismatched purchases, tiny girls buying the biggest dongs in stock, and bigger women picking out vibes the size of Tic Tacs. But the strangest stories were always about someone my friend referred to as Gary. Gary wasn't actually a guy, he was a woman presenting as a man. Now, my friend was gay and knew plenty of women who did that, but Gary stood out because, well, he was a bit of a jerk. Gary would openly solo it through his pants while browsing. He had to be spoken to multiple times for hitting on other customers. He'd walk up to the counter with his pants unzipped so everyone could see his prosthetic. And apparently, he wasn't great at binding his chest, so now and then a boob would slip free, or the whole binding would unravel. According to my friend, Gary had a surprisingly nice jugs. Her words, not mine. Despite all of it, Gary spent so much money at the store that they mostly just tolerated him. My friend swore he was harmless, just incredibly awkward and oddly committed to the bit. She could never quite figure out if Gary was role-playing some kind of sleazy guy for his own gratification, or if that was genuinely the kind of man he aspired to be. She said it was like performance art, completely bizarre and endlessly confusing. Story 28. One guy would call asking about red lingerie for his wife. As he talked, he'd explain he needed her to look perfect for her big black boyfriend, or he'd be in trouble. All you could really say was that we had plenty of lingerie organized by color, but he'd just keep going, getting more worked up until he started crying. You'd have to hang up, and sure enough, he'd call back a few days later. Kids would prank call a lot too. Some callers would start off asking innocent questions about products, but then you'd hear their breathing get heavier or even moans, and you'd just hang up. That was pretty common. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.